In a small, sleepy town where life moved at its own gentle pace, Mrs. Eleanor Grayson was a familiar face. At 78 years old, she had lived in the same cozy house for over 4 decades. Her garden was always blooming with vibrant flowers, and her front porch often smelled of freshly baked cookies. Neighbors adored her kindness and admired how she carried herself with quiet strength despite her age. But what truly set her apart was her loyal companion, Max, a golden retriever who never left her side. Max wasn't just any dog. He was a retired military canine. Years ago, he'd been part of an elite team, trained to detect explosives and protect soldiers on dangerous missions. After serving faithfully, Max retired and found his forever home with Mrs. Grayson. To most people in the neighborhood, Max looked like an ordinary friendly dog, wagging his tail, playing fetch in the yard, or lounging lazily under the sun. Few knew about his past, and fewer still understood the depth of his training. Even now, Max still responded to commands with precision, his instincts as sharp as ever. Mrs. Grayson cherished Max more than words could express. He wasn't just her pet. He was her protector, her friend, and her family. Every morning, they would take a leisurely walk around the block, stopping occasionally to chat with neighbors. Children loved petting Max, and adults often commented on how well-behaved he was. What no one realized was that beneath his calm exterior lay years of discipline and readiness to act when needed. On this particular evening, Mrs. Grayson decided to visit the local grocery store. She picked up a few essentials: bread, milk, and some fresh vegetables from the market. As she headed back home, the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the streets. The air grew cooler, and the once bustling neighborhood fell into a peaceful silence. With Max trotting happily beside her, she felt safe, as she always did whenever he was near. Unbeknownst to her, two figures lurked nearby, watching her every move. Jake and Ryan were small-time troublemakers who thrived on targeting vulnerable individuals. They thought they were clever, picking places where no one would suspect them. That evening, they spotted Mrs. Grayson walking alone, clutching her shopping bag tightly. To them, she seemed like an easy mark, an elderly woman with nothing but a harmless dog for company. Little did they know, their plan was about to unravel in ways they couldn't have imagined. As Mrs. Grayson turned onto a quieter street lined with tall trees, Jake and Ryan exchanged smirks. They followed her discreetly, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Their confidence surged as they noticed how frail she appeared, weighed down by her groceries. And then there was Max, wagging his tail as if oblivious to the danger looming nearby. "Piece of cake," Jake whispered to Ryan, convinced they'd walk away with whatever valuables Mrs. Grayson carried without breaking a sweat. But appearances can be deceiving. While Jake and Ryan saw only an old woman and her docile dog, Max sensed something far more sinister. His ears twitched slightly, catching sounds too faint for human ears. His nose sniffed the air, detecting traces of unease. Though he continued to walk calmly beside Mrs. Grayson, his body tensed imperceptibly. Max knew something was wrong, and he was ready. The stage was set. Two men approached, thinking they held all the power. An elderly woman walked home, unaware of the threat closing in. And between them stood a silent guardian, prepared to defend his owner at a moment's notice. What happened next would change everything, for everyone involved. Jake and Ryan had been watching Mrs. Grayson for a few minutes now, their confidence growing with each passing second. They stayed hidden in the shadows of a row of parked cars, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. To them, this was just another routine job, nothing out of the ordinary. They'd done it before, targeting people who seemed too weak or distracted to put up much of a fight. And tonight, everything about Mrs. Grayson screamed easy target. She walked slowly, her steps deliberate but weighed down by the grocery bag in her hand. Her shoulders were slightly hunched, and her focus seemed to be entirely on getting home. Max trotted beside her, his golden coat glowing faintly in the dim light of the street lamp. He looked relaxed, even cheerful, wagging his tail occasionally as if enjoying the evening stroll. Jake smirked at the sight of him. "Look at that mutt," he muttered under his breath to Ryan. "What's he gonna do? Bark at us?" Ryan chuckled nervously, though something about the dog made him uneasy. There was an alertness in Max's eyes, a quiet intensity that didn't quite match the playful demeanor of an ordinary pet. But Jake brushed it off. Dogs like that couldn't possibly pose a real threat, or so he thought. The two men timed their approach carefully, slipping out of the shadows when Mrs. Grayson entered a quieter stretch of road lined with tall trees. The streetlights here were fewer, casting long patches of darkness between pools of yellow light. It was the ideal spot, an area where screams could go unheard and prying eyes wouldn't see. As they stepped into her path, blocking her way, Mrs. Grayson stopped abruptly. Her expression shifted from calm to wary, though she didn't panic. Instead, she tightened her grip on the grocery bag and took a small step back, putting some distance between herself and the strangers. "Hand over your purse, lady," Jake demanded, his voice rough and commanding. He held out one hand expectantly, while keeping the other tucked into his jacket pocket, a subtle attempt to intimidate her further. Ryan lingered behind him, glancing around nervously to make sure no one else was nearby. For all his bravado earlier, he wasn't entirely comfortable with this situation either. Something about the way Mrs. Grayson stood so composed unnerved him. Max reacted instantly. Though he had appeared carefree moments ago, his entire demeanor changed the moment Jake spoke. His tail stopped wagging, and his body stiffened like a coiled spring. His ears perked up, swiveling toward the men as if analyzing every sound they made. Most strikingly, his gaze locked onto Jake with unsettling focus. Those warm, friendly eyes turned cold and calculating, radiating a quiet warning that sent shivers down Jake's spine. Ryan noticed it too. Dude, maybe we should just leave," he whispered hesitantly, tugging at Jake's sleeve. But Jake ignored him, his pride refusing to let him back down now. "Relax," he snapped. "It's just a stupid dog. Look at him. He's harmless." Harmless. If only Jake knew the truth. Max wasn't just any dog. Beneath that gentle exterior lay years of rigorous training, honed during his time as a military canine. He had faced far more dangerous situations than this, situations where lives depended on his quick thinking and unwavering loyalty. Now, standing protectively beside Mrs. Grayson, Max assessed the threat with precision. Every movement, every sound, every scent registered in his mind. He didn't bark or lunge. Not yet. This was a silent warning, a chance for the intruders to reconsider their actions before things escalated. Mrs. Grayson placed a calming hand on Max's back, feeling the tension in his muscles beneath her palm. She knew better than anyone what Max was capable of, but she also trusted him to wait for her signal. "Boys," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the tense atmosphere, "you don't want to do this." Her tone was steady, almost motherly, yet it carried an unmistakable authority that caught both men off guard. For a brief moment, doubt flickered across Jake's face. Was this frail-looking woman really issuing a warning? Or was it just a desperate bluff? Before he could decide, Ryan spoke up again, his voice trembling. "Jake, man, I don't like this. Let's just go." But Jake wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. He took another step forward, reaching toward Mrs. Grayson's purse. That's when Max let out a low growl, a deep guttural sound that reverberated through the air like a thunderclap. It was a noise neither man expected, nor wanted to hear. Their bravado began to crack, replaced by unease as they realized they might have underestimated not just the elderly woman, but her dog as well. The low growl that rumbled from Max's throat was unlike anything Jake or Ryan had ever heard. It wasn't the playful bark of a family pet, or the irritated yelp of a dog defending its food bowl. This was something primal, a sound that seemed to echo straight into their bones. Jake froze mid-step, his hand hovering inches away from Mrs. Grayson's purse. For the first time since they'd started this reckless plan, doubt clouded his mind. Ryan, who had been trying to convince Jake to back off moments earlier, took an involuntary step backward. His eyes darted between Max and Jake, searching for some kind of reassurance. But Jake looked just as unsettled as he did. "What the hell is wrong with this dog?" Ryan whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of his own heart. He glanced around nervously, half expecting someone else to appear and intervene. The street remained eerily quiet, save for the faint rustling of leaves in the cool night breeze. Max didn't move. He stood perfectly still, his body rigid and poised like a statue carved out of determination. Every hair on his golden coat seemed to bristle with tension. His piercing gaze never left Jake, tracking his every movement with unnerving precision. To anyone watching, it might have looked like Max was simply glaring at the intruder. But there was more to it than that. Max wasn't just observing, he was calculating. Years of training had taught him how to assess threats, anticipate actions, and respond accordingly. And right now, he was giving Jake one final chance to reconsider. Mrs. Grayson, standing calmly behind Max, felt the weight of the situation settle heavily in the air. She didn't need to say another word. Her dog had already made her position clear. Still, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride as she watched Max take charge. Despite his age and retirement, he hadn't lost a single ounce of his skill or instinct. If anything, his bond with her only amplified his protective nature. She rested her hand lightly on Max's back again, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing beneath her palm. It was a gesture meant to reassure both herself and Max, though she knew he didn't need it. He was ready. Jake, however, wasn't so sure. He swallowed hard, his bravado crumbling under the weight of Max's unwavering stare. "Relax, man," he muttered, attempting to mask his unease with forced confidence. "It's just a dog." But even as he said it, his voice wavered slightly, betraying the fear bubbling beneath the surface. Ryan shot him a panicked look. "Just a dog. Did you hear that growl? That thing sounds like it wants to eat us alive." "It's not going to eat you," Mrs. Grayson interjected firmly, her tone sharp enough to cut through the tension. Both men turned their attention to her, startled by the authority in her voice. She stood tall, despite her petite frame, exuding a quiet strength that commanded respect. "But if you lay a finger on me or my belongings, Max will do what he was trained to do. And trust me, you don't want that." Her words hung in the air like a challenge, daring them to test her claim. Jake hesitated, his fingers twitching as he debated whether to push forward or retreat. Pride warred with self-preservation inside him. On one hand, backing down now would mean admitting defeat and possibly losing face in front of Ryan. On the other hand, the thought of provoking Max further sent a chill running down his spine. He glanced at Ryan again, hoping for support, but found none. Ryan was too busy staring at Max, his face pale and beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Max, sensing their indecision, shifted slightly, his muscles tense even more, coiling like springs beneath his fur. A soft rumble escaped his throat, a reminder that he was still there, still watching, still waiting. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to send Jake stumbling backward. Okay, he stammered, holding up his hands defensively. We're just messing around, all right. No harm done." Mrs. Grayson raised an eyebrow, unimpressed by his attempt to downplay the situation. "Messing around," she repeated, her voice laced with disbelief. "You think threatening an elderly woman is messing around?" Ryan, desperate to defuse the situation, chimed in quickly. "We're sorry, ma'am. We didn't mean any trouble. Honest." His apology came out rushed and frantic, his words tumbling over each other in his haste to escape Max's intimidating presence. But Jake, stubborn as ever, tried to salvage whatever scraps of dignity he had left. Yeah, we're leaving," he muttered, casting one last wary glance at Max before turning to walk away. Neither man moved far. They shuffled awkwardly, glancing over their shoulders as if expecting Max to chase after them. But Max stayed rooted in place, his focus unwavering. He wouldn't attack unless provoked. That much was clear. Yet his mere presence was enough to keep Jake and Ryan froze. Jake's attempt to play it cool fell flat the moment he turned his back on Max. He took a hesitant step forward, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting the dog to lunge at any second. Ryan, still visibly shaken, hovered close behind him, his eyes darting between Max and Mrs. Grayson. Neither man could shake the feeling that they were being watched, not just by the dog, but also by fate itself. The air felt heavy, charged with anticipation, as though the world was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. But Max didn't move. Not yet. He remained perfectly still, his body taut like a tightly wound spring. His gaze never wavered, locked onto Jake, with an intensity that made the man's skin crawl. It wasn't anger radiating from Max. It was control. Every muscle in his body was ready to act, but he waited patiently, responding only to Mrs. Grayson's unspoken command. For all their bravado earlier, Jake and Ryan were now trapped in a silent standoff with a creature far more disciplined than they could have imagined. "Come on, man, let's get out of here," Ryan pleaded under his breath, his voice trembling. "This isn't worth it." But Jake, stubborn and unwilling to admit defeat, hesitated. He couldn't leave without at least trying to salvage some shred of pride. Taking another cautious step backward, he muttered loudly enough for Mrs. Grayson to hear, "Whatever, lady. You got lucky this time." His words hung in the air, hollow and meaningless. Even he knew they weren't true. Luck had nothing to do with it. This was something else entirely, a lesson in underestimating someone based on appearances. Before Jake could take another step, Max moved. In one fluid motion, he sprang forward, closing the distance between himself and Jake in the blink of an eye. There was no warning bark, no dramatic pause, just pure, calculated action. The impact sent Jake stumbling backward, his arms flailing as he lost his balance. Within seconds, Max had pinned him to the ground, his powerful paws pressing firmly against Jake's chest. Though Max's teeth were bared, they didn't make contact. He held back just enough to immobilize his target without causing harm. Still, the message was clear. This was not a game. Jake froze, his eyes wide with terror as he stared up at the dog towering over him. His bravado vanished completely, replaced by sheer panic. Ryan gasped, taking several steps back until he bumped into a lamppost. "Oh my God. Oh my God," he stammered, his hands raised in surrender. "Please, please don't hurt us. We're sorry." Mrs. Grayson stepped forward calmly, her presence commanding despite her petite frame. She didn't raise her voice or gloat. Instead, she spoke with quiet authority. "Max," she said firmly, "hold." Max obeyed instantly, maintaining his position over Jake while keeping one eye trained on Ryan. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Jake lay frozen beneath Max, too terrified to move, while Ryan stood rooted to the spot, his face pale and sweaty. For a moment, everything went silent. The only sounds were the faint rustling of leaves overhead and the shallow breathing of the two men. Jake's mind raced, replaying every decision that had led him to this moment. How had things gone so wrong? They'd planned for an easy score, a quick grab and run. Instead, they were facing off against a highly trained animal who seemed capable of reading their thoughts. Ryan, desperate to break the silence, tried reasoning with Mrs. Grayson again. "Ma'am, we swear we won't bother you ever again. Just call him off, please." His voice cracked with desperation, betraying the fear bubbling inside him. Jake, unable to speak, simply nodded frantically, his eyes pleading for mercy. Mrs. Grayson studied them both carefully, her expression unreadable. After what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke. "You picked the wrong person tonight," she said evenly, her tone carrying the weight of finality. "Max served overseas protecting soldiers. Do you really think he'd let you hurt me?" Her words struck a chord, not just with Jake and Ryan, but with anyone who might have doubted the bond between humans and animals. Max wasn't just a pet. He was a guardian, a protector, and a testament to loyalty. As the reality of their situation sank in, Jake and Ryan exchanged panicked glances. They realized too late that they weren't dealing with an ordinary dog or an ordinary woman. Their arrogance had blinded them, leading them straight into a confrontation they couldn't win. And as they lay there, humbled and defeated, they understood one thing clearly. Max wasn't done with them yet. The weight of Max's paws pressing down on Jake's chest was more than physical. It was a crushing reminder of how badly their plan had unraveled. Jake lay motionless, his breaths shallow and uneven, while Ryan stood frozen a few feet away, his hands still raised in surrender. Neither man dared to move, their eyes darting between Mrs. Grayson and her formidable dog. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the cool night breeze. Mrs. Grayson took another step forward, her calm demeanor masking the storm of emotions swirling inside her. She wasn't afraid, not anymore, but she couldn't deny the anger simmering beneath the surface. These two men had thoughtlessly targeted her, assuming she was weak and vulnerable simply because of her age. Now, they were learning the hard way just how wrong they'd been. "Boys," she began, her voice steady but firm, "you made a grave mistake tonight." Her words hung in the air like a verdict, each syllable carrying the weight of authority. "You underestimated me, and you underestimated Max. But most importantly, you underestimated yourselves." Jake blinked up at her, confusion flickering across his face. He didn't understand what she meant. How could this situation possibly reflect on them? Ryan, however, seemed to grasp her point, if only partially. His shoulders slumped as shame began to creep into his expression. They weren't just victims of bad luck. They were standing face to face with the consequences of their choices. Max remained perfectly still, his gaze shifting between the two men. His body language spoke volumes. He wasn't letting go until he was certain the threat was neutralized. To Jake and Ryan, it felt like an eternity stretched out under Max's watchful eyes. Every second ticked by with excruciating slowness, forcing them to confront the gravity of their actions. Finally, Ryan found his voice again. "Ma'am, we're really sorry," he blurted out, his tone laced with genuine remorse. "We didn't mean for this to happen. We didn't know he was." His voice trailed off as he gestured toward Max, unable to finish the sentence. The realization hit him like a freight train. This wasn't just any dog. This was a highly trained military canine, a creature built for precision, discipline, and protection. Jake, still pinned to the ground, managed to nod in agreement. "Yeah, we messed up," he admitted, his earlier bravado completely gone. I don't even know what we thought. Please, just let us go." Mrs. Grayson studied them carefully, her sharp eyes assessing their sincerity. She knew better than anyone that apologies were cheap. They didn't erase bad decisions or repair harm done. But there was something different about these two men now. Fear and regret radiated off them in waves, replacing the cockiness they'd shown earlier. Perhaps they hadn't intended to cause real harm, but good intentions wouldn't have stopped them from taking what wasn't theirs. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "Max," she said softly, "release." Without hesitation, Max obeyed, stepping back from Jake but remaining alert. He kept his body low, ready to act if either man tried anything foolish. Jake scrambled to his feet, brushing dirt off his clothes as he avoided making eye contact with either Mrs. Grayson or Max. Ryan shuffled nervously beside him, his hands trembling slightly. For a moment, no one spoke. The quiet stretched on, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Then Mrs. Grayson broke the silence once more. "Do you boys know why Max is so good at what he does?" she asked, her tone softer now, but still commanding attention. When neither man answered, she continued, "It's because he was trained to protect, to anticipate danger and eliminate threats. But more than that, he was taught loyalty. Loyalty to those who matter." Her words struck a chord deep within Jake and Ryan. For all their talk of toughness and street smarts, they lacked the one thing that truly defines strength: purpose. Max wasn't acting out of malice or aggression. He was defending someone he loved. And in doing so, he'd revealed a truth neither man had considered before: that true power lies not in domination, but in protecting others. As the full weight of their failure settled over them, Jake and Ryan exchanged uneasy glances. They weren't just defeated, they were changed. Humiliated, yes, but also humbled. For the first time, they saw themselves through the eyes of someone else, and didn't like what they found. The distant sound of approaching sirens broke the tension in the air, growing louder with each passing second. A neighbor, alarmed by the commotion earlier, had called the police after hearing raised voices and the unmistakable growl of a dog. Jake and Ryan exchanged panicked looks, their already frayed nerves snapping at the realization that things were about to get worse. Mrs. Grayson, however, remained calm, her hand resting gently on Max's back, as if silently thanking him for his vigilance. When the flashing red and blue lights illuminated the street, two officers stepped out of their patrol car, their expressions serious as they surveyed the scene. One officer approached Mrs. Grayson first, his voice soft but professional. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked, glancing between her and the two men standing awkwardly nearby. "I'm fine," she replied evenly, gesturing toward Jake and Ryan. "These two tried to take my purse, but Max here stopped them before they could do anything." She spoke without anger or malice, simply stating the facts as they were. The officer nodded, jotting notes on his pad before turning his attention to the would-be robbers. Jake and Ryan immediately began talking over each other, their voices rising in desperation. "Officer, it was just a misunderstanding," Jake insisted, sweat beading on his forehead. "We weren't gonna hurt her, we swear." Ryan chimed in, nodding furiously. "Yeah, we didn't know her dog was, well, like that. We're really sorry." The second officer raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "Sorry doesn't fix bad decisions," he said sternly. "You don't target people because you think they're an easy mark. That's not how this works." As the officers questioned them further, Jake and Ryan spilled everything: their plan, their motives, even their regret. It wasn't bravery or honesty driving them. It was sheer terror. Knowing they were caught, and knowing Max was still watching them closely, they confessed every detail in hopes of leniency. Meanwhile, Mrs. Grayson stood quietly beside Max, letting the authorities handle the situation. Her composure never wavered, even when one of the officers asked about Max's background. "Retired military K-9, she explained proudly, patting Max's head. "He served overseas protecting soldiers. Tonight, he protected me." The officers exchanged impressed looks, quickly realizing why Jake and Ryan looked so shaken. One of them knelt down to examine Max more closely, marveling at the dog's calm demeanor despite the chaos around him. "This guy's a real hero," the officer remarked, scratching behind Max's ears. Max wagged his tail slightly, seemingly unfazed by the attention. Back at the station, Jake and Ryan faced further interrogation. Their initial bravado dissolved entirely as they learned more about Max's history, through conversations with the officers, and later, some research online. They discovered that Max had been part of an elite unit responsible for detecting explosives and apprehending suspects in high-risk situations. They stared at photos of Max in his military gear, barely recognizing the friendly-looking dog who had pinned Jake to the ground earlier. The realization hit hard. They hadn't encountered a pet. They'd tangled with a highly trained professional. Their guilt deepened as they reflected on what might have happened if Max hadn't shown restraint. He could have easily injured, or worse, both of them. Yet he held back, responding only to Mrs. Grayson's commands and stopping just short of causing serious harm. This wasn't blind aggression. It was calculated protection, and it left Jake and Ryan feeling not just defeated, but profoundly humbled. By the time their trial rolled around, both men expressed genuine remorse during their statements. They admitted their mistakes openly, crediting Max not only for stopping them that night, but also for teaching them a valuable lesson about respect and consequences. "I used to think dogs were just animals," Jake told the judge during sentencing. "But Max showed me something different. He showed me loyalty, discipline, and courage. I'll never forget that." Ryan echoed his sentiments, adding, "We messed up big time, Your Honor. But meeting Max made us see things differently. If anything good comes out of this, it's that we've learned to appreciate what really matters, like kindness, trust, and doing the right thing." Though the judge acknowledged their remorse, justice still needed to be served. Both men received sentences for attempted robbery, though their cooperation and newfound perspective earned them some leniency. As they prepared to serve their time, they vowed to turn their lives around, not just for themselves, but for the dog who had changed everything. After serving their sentences, Jake and Ryan emerged from prison determined to make amends, not just for the crime they had committed, but for the kind of people they had been. The memory of that fateful night lingered in their minds like a shadow, haunting yet transformative. Max's piercing gaze and Mrs. Grayson's quiet strength had left an indelible mark on them, forcing them to confront the emptiness of their past actions. Their first step toward redemption came unexpectedly when they stumbled upon a local animal shelter during one of their mandated community service hours. At first, both men groaned at the thought of spending time surrounded by barking dogs and curious cats. But as they walked through the shelter's doors, something shifted inside them. The wagging tails, hopeful eyes, and gentle nudges reminded them of Max and the lesson he had taught them about loyalty and second chances. Jake found himself drawn to a scrappy terrier mix named Lucky, whose energy seemed boundless despite his rough start in life. Ryan, on the other hand, bonded with a shy German shepherd named Daisy, who flinched at sudden movements but leaned into his touch once she felt safe. Over time, the two men discovered joy in caring for these animals, feeding them, walking them, and even helping potential adopters find their perfect match. What began as a chore became a passion, fueled by the desire to honor the dog who had changed their lives. Word spread quickly among the shelter staff about Jake and Ryan's dedication. They weren't just going through the motions. They genuinely cared. One volunteer mentioned how Jake spent extra hours training Lucky to overcome his fear of loud noises, using techniques he'd read about online. Another noted how Ryan patiently coaxed Daisy out of her shell, teaching her basic commands and boosting her confidence. Their efforts paid off when both Lucky and Daisy were adopted into loving homes, a victory that brought tears to their eyes. But their journey didn't stop there. Inspired by their experiences, Jake and Ryan decided to take things a step further. They started volunteering at schools and youth centers, sharing their story with teenagers who might be tempted to follow a similar path. "We thought we were tough," Jake would say, standing awkwardly in front of a group of skeptical kids. "But real toughness isn't about picking on others or stealing. It's about protecting what matters. It's about being brave enough to do the right thing, even when it's hard." Ryan chimed in, holding up a photo of Max on his phone. "This dog saved us, not just physically, but emotionally. He showed us what it means to have purpose. And now we're trying to live up to that example." The kids listened intently, captivated by the tale of the elderly woman and her fearless companion. Some laughed at Jake's description of how terrified he'd been under Max's paws, while others asked thoughtful questions about how they could turn their own lives around. The transformation in Jake and Ryan was undeniable. Gone were the reckless attitudes and selfish impulses that had defined their earlier years. In their place stood two men humbled by failure and inspired by forgiveness. They often joked that Max should get credit for their new lease on life, though neither of them ever forgot the weight of his silent warning that night. As months turned into years, they continued to visit shelters, speak at events, and advocate for responsible pet ownership. They also kept tabs on Mrs. Grayson and Max, sending occasional letters to thank them for the impact they'd made. Though they never expected a response, they cherished the rare moments when Mrs. Grayson wrote back, updating them on Max's golden years. "He's slowed down a bit," she once wrote, but he's still my hero every single day. Through all their efforts, Jake and Ryan proved that redemption wasn't just possible, it was powerful. They had gone from predators to protectors, channeling their regret into meaningful action. And though they knew they could never fully repay the debt they owed to Max and Mrs. Grayson, they vowed to keep paying it forward, one wagging tail at a time. Life eventually returned to its peaceful rhythm for Mrs. Eleanor Grayson and Max, though the events of that unforgettable night lingered in their hearts and in the hearts of those who had heard their story. The neighborhood buzzed with admiration for the elderly woman and her loyal companion, but Mrs. Grayson paid little attention to the praise. To her, Max was simply being himself, a devoted protector and a cherished friend. She never saw him as extraordinary because, to her, his courage and loyalty were just part of who he was. Max, too, seemed unfazed by the ordeal. Days after the incident, he resumed his usual routine of morning walks, afternoon naps, and playful romps in the backyard. His golden coat shimmered in the sunlight, and his tail wagged freely whenever neighbors stopped by to greet him. Children still flocked to pet him, unaware of the heroic streak hidden beneath his gentle demeanor. For Max, life went on as it always had, quiet, content, and filled with love. Yet the bond between Mrs. Grayson and Max grew even stronger in the aftermath. Their daily strolls became moments of reflection, where she would talk softly to him about gratitude and resilience. "You've taught so many people something important, Max," she often said, scratching behind his ears affectionately. "But you've always been my hero first." Max responded with a soft bark or a loving nudge, as if acknowledging her words. Meanwhile, Jake and Ryan continued their journey of redemption, carrying the lessons they'd learned into every aspect of their lives. They often visited animal shelters together, sharing stories of transformation with anyone willing to listen. Their speeches evolved over time, becoming less about themselves and more about the power of second chances for humans and animals alike. They credited Max not only for stopping them that night, but also for inspiring them to become better versions of themselves. The connection between Mrs. Grayson and the two men remained distant yet meaningful. Though they rarely crossed paths, Jake and Ryan sent occasional updates through letters, expressing their gratitude and sharing news of their progress. Mrs. Grayson appreciated these gestures, responding sparingly but warmly when she felt moved to do so. In one letter, she wrote, "Max and I are proud of you both. Redemption is a choice, and you've chosen wisely." As years passed, Max inevitably slowed down, his once spry movements giving way to the inevitable march of time. But even in his twilight years, his spirit remained unbroken. He still perked up at the sound of Mrs. Grayson's voice and trotted faithfully beside her during their walks. Neighbors marveled at how such a small dog could leave such a big legacy, proving that true strength lies not in size or ferocity, but in unwavering devotion. One crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves swirled around them, Mrs. Grayson paused mid-walk to look down at Max. His eyes met hers, filled with the same quiet wisdom that had guided him all those years ago. "Thank you, my brave boy," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. Max rested his head against her leg, his breathing steady and calm. Together, they stood for a moment, basking in the beauty of a life well lived. Though Max eventually crossed the Rainbow Bridge, leaving behind a void no words could fill, his memory lived on, not just in Mrs. Grayson's heart, but in the countless lives he touched. Jake and Ryan kept his photo framed on their walls, a constant reminder of the night that changed everything. And Mrs. Grayson, she planted a tree in her garden, dedicating it to Max with a simple plaque that read, "A hero's legacy lives forever." In the end, it wasn't the dramatic confrontation or the headlines that defined their story. It was the quiet moments of connection, the choices made in the face of fear, and the enduring bond between a woman and her dog. Max may have been retired, but his work was far from over. Through his actions, he reminded everyone who crossed his path that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, and sometimes they walk beside us on four legs, wagging their tails and changing the world one bark at a time.